Or maybe we won't.
Is that?
Getting an error. I'm getting an error. I'll try it again.
Oh.
If it is Sunday, it is wrestling night in America, or at least it is again now. For a while there, we were having shows every once in a while as we continued to get everything going here on YouTube, handling the post pay-per-view and PLE shows, and we'll continue to do that with me, your host for this evening, Brandon LeClair. I am here to talk yesterday's Crown Jewel Premium Live event on Peacock and, of course, WWE Network, still internationally, at least for the time being. And I'm not alone. For those of you who happen to not see the message on Twitter or other pwtorch platforms, I am joined this evening by the former host of this show, the one and only incomparable Greg Parks. I'll bring him on right now. Greg, it is good to see you back. I thought, when we said our goodbyes after, what was it, Bash in Berlin at the end of August, it would be a little while before we'd see you again. I didn't expect you so soon, but I'm happy.
You're too kind, Brandon. I'm always happy to fill in. This is kind of the role that I had envisioned for myself when I stepped away from Wrestling Night in America, is just kind of filling in here and there. I filled in on Dynamite post show for Wade Keller a few weeks ago, and just doing audio here and there. I did one of the more recent post pay-per-view roundtables with Wade and Todd Martin, which was really cool. So just kind of filling in here and there, and I knew eventually it would bring me back to Wrestling Night in America, and I'm happy to be here with you.
Yeah, very glad to have you and to be talking Crown Jewel tonight. I do want to mention real quickly here. I did see as we were going live, I did receive an error telling me that we are not currently live on Twitch. So for anyone who typically joins us on Twitch, we should be live on other PWT channels as normal, but there was an issue getting going there where Twitch was throwing an error. So it looks like we are live everywhere else, and you can certainly join us on those social channels and in the chat as well. We'll certainly be taking your comments, and VIP callers are welcome too. We can get you on as part of the show as we progress here. Like I said, we're going to be talking yesterday's WWE Crown Jewel event that was held at the Mohammed Abdu Arena in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. I do also want to mention, I know that WWE was taping an episode of Raw earlier this afternoon, our time. I'm going to probably go through this show as though spoiler free. So we'll just pretend that show hasn't happened. If you happen to have looked at results already, just keep those out for the sake of people who want to watch the show tomorrow and not be spoiled. I haven't seen the spoilers myself, so anything that I say will be just going off of what we saw yesterday on the pay-per-view. Greg, same deal for you. Have you checked? Have you seen spoilers or anything?
Let me tell you, I'm so far behind. I have not seen spoilers. I have not seen online chatter for Crown Jewel. So if there's
Okay.
anything that came out of this that made it online but didn't make it on Crown Jewel, I have not seen it. I just got caught up on Crown Jewel today. I was out all yesterday. Didn't even have time to catch it before I went to bed last night. So I'm still haven't watched AEW from this weekend. So I am as far behind as you can be, but still be here and be able to talk about Crown Jewel.
All right, perfect. That works. That works. It'll as long as you've seen Crown Jewel, we can get through it. So
Yes.
we'll start. We'll just run through the card here in chronological order. Like I was telling Greg before, I don't anticipate we'll be here for a ton of time. I didn't find this to be a terribly noteworthy show, but there is certainly stuff to talk about and discuss, and we'll try to.
You mean you didn't find
through.
the crowning of the first ever Crown Jewel champions to be something that you'll be making year-end
Well,
lists about next month?
Well, Greg, considering they had to slip in during the broadcast that the title belts were not going to be taken home to the US. They're going to be left in Saudi Arabia at the WWE experience just to send home the message that, hey, this really is worthless. We don't care about this very much. That was a nice little touch. So yeah, we'll get into all that. I do see we've got VIP member Azan White on the line as well, so we'll bring him in just a little bit. Before we do that, let's just go right into to the opening match here on the card. We had a bloodline or an inter bloodline 6-man tag team match. This was OG Bloodline versus the new Bloodline. Solo Sikoa, Jacob Fatu, and Tama Tonga with Tonga Loa. They ended up defeating Roman Reigns and the reuniting Jimmy and Jay Uso in just under 17 minutes. I thought it was a decent enough opener. Entrances were longer than the match. I remember looking at the time when the entrances were getting over, and it was like 20 past 1 here on the East Coast.
This is
So
where
they
watching it the next day is very helpful.
exactly. You got to skip the fanfare. Greg, what'd you think of the match?
Yeah, it was a bloodline match. I think, we've become accustomed to maybe numb to our expectations for these kinds of matches. I think we were looking at this more so as a way to advance the expected story heading into blood and guts, heading into War Games. Sorry, wrong promotion. Heading into War Games at Survivor Series. I think everybody was kind of looking at this, and in the back of their mind, trying to figure out, okay, how does the booking of this match get us to War Games? And I think we saw that with Sami Zayn coming out in the end. And even though he cost the original Bloodline the match, you do kind of figure he's going to figure in somehow on that side, making it 4-on-4 for War Games. So I think, the biggest thing coming out of this match, Solo Sikoa pins Roman Reigns. I think that's going to be something that the new Bloodline is going to use as a talking point on SmackDown over the next few weeks as the hype for Survivor Series gets into gear.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the sentiment here, this being a typical bloodline style match. I thought that the opening 10 minutes or so of the action itself, you saw the typical bloodline antics, the double teaming of Jimmy and of Jay, triple teaming at times, keeping them away from Roman Reigns, all building to that big moment where Reigns gets the hot tag. And I thought, typically these bloodline matches go a fair amount of time. So I was sort of expecting we'd see Reigns, do his thing for a bit, tag out, we get a little bit more from the Usos, and then maybe Reigns comes in for the finish. But this was just a straightforward Reigns gets one tag and he's in until the end of the match. And they sort of did the usual bloodline stuff where all hell kind of breaks loose there in the final few minutes, and there's Usos flying over the top, and Jacob Fatu's doing his thing. So it was a by the numbers bloodline match, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, especially in this opening spot, where oftentimes we're used to seeing this be the main event. So I thought in the opening spot it worked well for what it was, and I'm with you, Greg. I thought that the biggest thing here, the biggest thing to take away is how nicely they set the table for War Games, because we all know that this is where this is headed. They needed to get a fourth guy involved on the OG bloodline side. And
Mhm.
so you introduce Sami Zayn as that guy, and then you tease the dissension amongst the people involved in the match, because they've got another, what is it, 3.5 4 weeks to build until Survivor Series. So still work to do there and a ways to go before we get a unified front for Roman Reigns. And really, that's where a lot of the magic that they've been able to cultivate with the bloodline has taken place in the will they or won't they of whether or not you're going to see them act as a united front, or if there's going to be dissension and feuding between the groups. So I thought they did a good job with that, and we'll see what War Games looks like. Before
Yeah, the
we, yeah, go
the
ahead.
the Usos. Let me just a couple more things on this
Yeah.
that stood out as you were talking. Is I thought they did a nice job, as they usually do with these bloodline matches, sort of inserting these mini stories in the match
Mhm.
and really allowing the very distinct personalities of each member of the bloodline stand out. I mean, there was the whole debate about the Usos tagging each other in, and they're like, the announcers even made mention, they're trying to tell, I can't remember if it was Jimmy or Jay, telling the other one, tag Roman, and he's like,
Mhm.
he's one of us. He's not above us anymore, right? So he should be playing a part just as we're playing a part. So there was that too that I liked, and as far as keeping Roman Reigns out and only having him tag in once, it's Roman Reigns, so he kind of has that special aura about him that allows him to do that. But you also wonder, are they saving interactions
Yes.
with him and Solo, with him and Jacob
Yep.
Fatu for down the line, that they don't want to give away too much physicality between these two. And I don't know if they're saving that for War Games at Survivor Series. I don't know if they're saving that for WrestleMania. Like, I don't
Mhm.
know if the plan, you could conceivably see a scenario where you do Roman Reigns versus Solo Sikoa at WrestleMania. So are they saving the kind of physicality for that a little bit? Now Reigns has a story. Not only is he trying to get his head of the table moniker back, but he's been pinned now by Solo Sikoa. So
Mhm.
there's that added to it. So when you're looking at the match and looking at it from a very fine perspective, is looking at who's in the match against who are they keeping away from each other, and what might be the reasoning for that. And I think with Roman Reigns not tagging until the end, you can kind of see a scenario where they might be trying to keep him away from a few, at least one of the other members of the bloodline.
Yeah, yeah, good point for sure. I think that, and you saw too that the level of interest from the crowd when Roman for the first time was getting in there with the likes of Solo and
Mhm.
with Jacob Fatu, and I do think it was jarring too to see Roman take a pin. I mean, we're so
Yeah.
used to him being so dominant over the years, and it happens so rarely that he eats a pinfall loss that you expect it something huge at WrestleMania with Cody Rhodes, but on a show like this, you're not necessarily expecting to see Solo pin Roman Reigns, especially when there are other options in the match for to take the pinfall. So, yeah, it's good you brought that up. I think it's definitely a big moment for the story, and also to see how much they have invested in Solo Sikoa. I mean,
Mhm.
whether you have enjoyed his in-ring output recently or not, I think it's a big deal that we are, seeing him get a pinfall win over Roman Reigns.
Yeah, and this is one of those situations where not being there and following the happenings live on social media, it sort of is, handicaps you a little bit,
Mhm.
because I would be interested to go back and see just how big of a deal Reigns taking the pin was seen as by
Sure.
people
Yeah.
who were watching the show on social media. Was it treated like a big deal? Was it treated as a big shock? Or is it just, are they able to explain it away and say, oh, this is to continue the dissension between Sami Zayn and the Bloodline? There's nothing worse for Roman Reigns than getting beaten, than getting pinned, especially by Solo Sikoa. So how much is he going to hold that against Sami Zayn? To what degree does he hold that against Sami Zayn as they go forward and try to get together and make a team for War Games? So I'm just would have been interested to be following along for that.
Yeah, for sure. So before we move on with the rest of the card, I am going to bring on a VIP member, Azan White, who is waiting patiently here to join us. And Azan, go ahead and let me know what did you want to discuss about Crown Jewel tonight?
I just want to discuss the whole Randy Orton Kevin Owens brawl
Sure.
as far as that features. Because I feel like it was done in a way that maybe those two might not be on TV heading into Survivor Series. They might get suspended since they both attacked the officials. What do you think about that idea? Keeping Cody kind of off the card of Survivor Series and really focusing on this bloodline stuff heading into the. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, Greg, I was when we got to this particular segment, I was going to mention I was not a big fan of the false advertising aspect here. I understand the reasons for doing it, and I want to. I think think it might have been Zach Haydorn on Twitter who mentioned at the time, as the show was happening live, that this would have been a great segment on SmackDown, and I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. I would have avoided putting something like this on the pay per view, simply because I'm not a fan of not delivering something that you're advertising, especially when it's a big match on a PLE. I understand why they did it. As far as the implications that you raise is on, I think that you're right. I think it's probably being done to take Randy off of television, at least temporarily, and maybe slot Kevin Owens in for a title match against Cody Rhodes without Randy kind of being there to get in the way. But I'm not sure. I mean, the beatdown wasn't significant enough that it made me feel like, oh, Randy's got to be off TV for a while now. They didn't go far enough for me to say, there's no way that Randy can't just come back in a week or two. So, Greg, what do you think about all of that?
Well, I hadn't thought about what Azan brought up, but I mean, we also have to take into account that Randy Orton RKO'd Adam Pearce, the Raw general manager, as well as I think both men beat up several producers. So if you're looking for a reason to suspend one or both of these guys, it's not necessarily the chaos they cause, it's the assault on WWE officials, which in the past has gotten wrestlers quote unquote suspended on screen. So I think that would be the direction they're going. I'd also disagree with you a little bit on the false advertising aspect. Look, I think, 99 times out of 100, yes, wrestling companies should go through with what they advertise. That's a no-brainer. But I think when what you deliver is significantly more interesting than what a bell-to-bell match would be, both for the live crowd and for the audience watching at home, I think those are the exceptions. And WWE does not do this very often. They don't advertise matches on pay-per-view and not deliver them without a reason. Like, I mean, they would have to be an extreme circumstance. They don't book these non-matches like this often. So I think if you do it once in a great while and you do it to the degree that WWE did, where again, I think what we saw and what we got out of that was probably more interesting than what the match would have been. I think that makes it land a little easier.
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that perspective for sure. And I didn't think that this was an egregious example of sort of some of the things that we've seen in the past. And I definitely think that there is merit to the idea that, and I actually even noted in my report for pwtorch that the crowd seemed satisfied, and I think that is a big, a big relief in terms of giving a justification for booking something like that. I just, by and large, I wish that they would avoid doing it when at all possible. But I don't think that I don't think that it ruined the quality of the show or marred, what else, the other stuff that they did on the show. My rule of thumb would just be, avoid it if you can. Azan, anything else you want to say to that, or anything else you wanted to talk about?
My own question. I saw some people online being upset for Gunther shaking Cody's hand. I don't understand why the hate is. Like, I feel like if we're presenting wrestling as a sport competition, it should be okay for like a young buck shake Private Party hand or Gunther shaking Cody's hand after a long grueling match. It's a sign of respect, and we're treating wrestling as a sport. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, Greg, what? Go ahead.
I didn't have a problem with it. I think we saw sort of the breaking the wall kind of moment with Cody Rhodes celebrating with Liv Morgan there at the end, and her being much more of a baby face, or at least sort of out of character for doing that, for winning the belt. And so, if you want to take it again, as Azan says, as a sport like event, then you could have a heel Gunther. And I mean, Gunther's shtick is built around, being the best. And if he's bested by someone, even if he has a snobby attitude about it, even if he, as the announcers, like, I don't know how much this resonates at home to people, that Gunther just wants to go out and wrestle and not want to do with media and not want to like do make a way. Like they made that like the crux of this story. And hey, in my mind, it's great if Cody wants to do that. But if Gunther is still going out there and being the best and still fulfilling his contractual obligations, who am I to hold against him that he doesn't want to do all this stuff? Like, I mean, it doesn't matter to me. Like, I'm not sitting at home tutting Gunther because he's not on the Today Show. Like, to think that that resonates with the fans, I think is WWE kind of up their own rear ends with how they view themselves and how they view the media. But I'm getting off track a little bit. But anyway, Gunther is not a heel that we see that wouldn't shake somebody's hand. I think he is the type of heel that he recognizes when someone beat him, and it's not that he's turning babyface, it's not that anything like that. But so no, I didn't have a huge problem with that.
Yeah, I didn't think it was I didn't think it was like a end of the world type thing. It ruins the booking. It ruins.
I didn't think it was so outside of the character that they're presenting that I should be offended by it. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. I do. I think that would I have preferred that he didn't. I mean, I think maybe just keeping up the appearances of the heel Gunther character, but I also think that it isn't that much of a stretch outside of the norm of what we've come to expect with Gunther. I mean, Gunther is a guy who wants to beat you and brag about it, but will give props when he feels they are due, even if he might pull back on it the following night, or he might do it in a backhanded way. He has been a guy in the past who we have seen sort of make concessions when he's come up just short. And so I didn't think it was a big deal so much as the entire concept of the match was. Like, I just wouldn't put your world champion in that position to begin with. I would prefer that they had opted not to do these matches, because I think they're counterproductive to the storytelling that they're trying to do. Right. But outside of the context of that, I didn't think that the handshake is going to make a huge difference one way or the other. The same way that I didn't necessarily see, like, and we'll get into this, the same way I didn't necessarily see, like, Liv Morgan at the end of the show accepting a handshake from Cody Rhodes as being all character breaking. I mean, is it great in the moment? Not really, but it's not something that I think that she has any real issue overcoming. And the same goes with Gunther.
And let me say this too, because I know there was a lot of discussion earlier in the year, not so much lately, but Gunther's eventual babyface turn and how big that would be. Well, I mean, if that's the direction you want to go, maybe not even 6 months from now, maybe it's a year from now, maybe whatever like that. I think it wouldn't hurt to plant seeds and say, hey, this guy real recognizes real, right? And that's what he's doing with Cody Rhodes there. Maybe planting a small seed for later on a babyface turn at some point.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, and I suspect it's not going to come anytime soon. I think there's still a lot of plans with Gunther for the time being as a heel, but it certainly sets the table with the idea that this guy respects the business. He respects, and that's been Gunther's character since day one. He respects the pro wrestling business. He's a consummate professional in terms of the in-ring prowess, what he expects of his opponents. And so in the rare event that he does get bested, it makes some sense that he would show a certain level of begrudging respect for the man who bested him.
Yep.
Azan, anything else that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, what do you think about LA Knight's future? He teased the heel turn during the build up to the freeway feud after being like Andrade, Carmelo. I feel like there's nobody else in the singles division on SmackDown that's on the level of him for the US belt. So he kind of like on his own island. Who do you think like should go against him? You think a Nakamura feud would be exciting, or is that just Nakamura had too many chances? What do you think about LA Knight's future?
Yeah, I was thinking about this as I was finishing up my report yesterday for pwtorch. Trying to think of what's next for LA Knight, seeming like this thing with Carmelo and Andrade has maybe run its course. And I was coming up empty in terms of many options for him, and I think that's the situation on SmackDown right now. They're a little thin, especially in the upper mid card. I think that LA Knight has been. I don't think that they're gonna move forward with a heel turn, at least not yet. I certainly see the teasing of that direction, but I think that kind of plays into who LA Knight has been even as a babyface. He's kind of willing, to be rough around the edges to get done what he perceives he needs to get done. I don't know how many guys really stand out to me on either side of the coin. Like if they were to pull the trigger on a heel turn, um, who is out there for him to get a program to really sink his teeth into. Nakamura is an interesting suggestion, but I don't know how much tread is left on those tires. I mean, they went with a pretty significant push for Shinsuke for a while there. A lot of people seem to think that it was a courting attempt for not Konosuke Takeshita, but for Kazuchika Okada. And once Okada signed with AEW, they backed off quite considerably. So I'm just not sure. Like that seems like an okay 1 month, B pay-per-view program if they wanted to do something like that. But I don't see it as like a big draw that's going to really elevate the US title. Greg, am I missing anyone in particular that really stands out to you?
One guy I would suggest would be AJ Styles, but now with his foot injury, he's going to be out a while. So
Mhm.
really, there's nobody else unless we're still wish casting a Montez Ford babyface push. But even then,
Well, he's vocal now.
it yeah, it runs into the same situation with Shinsuke Nakamura, where are you going to have anything more than a 1 month or 2 month feud at best there? And then,
Mhm.
okay, what happens when that's done? Now you're left with LA Knight as a heel and no challengers for him. So,
Yeah.
uh, you know, the potential opponents aside, I do think it would be very hard to turn LA Knight heel because you're not going to stop the chance and everything
Right.
that made him popular. And his promos would not be a lot different as a heel. So I think you're still going to get like the callbacks from the fans and you're still going to get the same reactions because I don't think it's going to change enough for the fans to kind of recognize it and all of a sudden start booing him without him having to go like hard after the hometown crowd or, that sort of thing. So I'm not really sure there's any benefit to it at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to forget too that LA Knight was sort of turned by the fans in the first place,
Yeah.
and there hasn't really been any sort of groundswell of disinterest or lackadaisical response to him. So it doesn't seem like the interest has run its course. So my expectation is for him to continue down this path. It's just it's a matter of finding him quality opponents, and I mean one guy that you could certainly mention there would be, the members of Legado del Fantasma. But I don't know how much legs something like a Santos Escobar feud has at this point. I'm not sure if that is anything more than another B level month to 2 month angle, unfortunately. So yeah, they've got a bit of a conundrum with
Maybe they can build a
LA Knight right
Giovanni
now.
Vinci.
What was that?
Maybe they could build somebody like a Giovanni Vinci, somebody who's been untouched.
Yeah, I mean there's guys like Giovanni Vinci who they brought back to TV, and then he sort of disappeared after that 2 week stint, the weird loss, and then he comes back another week and wrestles a competitive match, and we haven't seen him since. Azan, are we forgetting anybody else that you can think of over on the SmackDown side?
Maybe if they do like, I don't know. I know they've been teasing the breakup between Austin and Grayson, but maybe one of
Mhm.
those two can just while doing the breakup challenge LA Knight. That'd be a fun feud.
Yeah, I mean you could even have Theory and Waller go back and forth, and not even necessarily break them up, but compete over who is going to challenge LA Knight. The problem right now is that both Theory and Waller have been defined down so significantly that I think that if you put them in that position without giving them some credible wins first, people aren't going to take that seriously as a feud where LA Knight is in any danger. Greg, is that something that you think that they could work up to, or are Theory and Waller too far gone?
No, nobody's too far gone. We've seen too many wrestlers come back from the silliest things and still get significant pushes within WWE. So I do think there is, at this point, probably more value with Waller and Theory separate than together. I think that the whole tag team and their story together has kind of run its course. So I'm for a breakup sooner rather than later for those two.
Yeah. Azan, anything else you wanted to bring up before we continue on with the card rundown?
Yeah, I know everybody disliked the match between Liv and Nia, but I'm not expecting good matches from them. It's all about the character work. So I understand people want good matches from WWE, but when you look at those two, I wasn't going in there expecting character matches. I mean, good matches from them. I was expecting storylines and stuff like that. So should fans be more acceptable to interference, or they just should be mad about it as is?
Yeah, it's a catch-22 because I think that we've entered an era where fans are expecting great wrestling from major events, especially these premium live events, and from AEW pay-per-views. And AEW has set the bar so high in that regard that I think you see a lot of people get really disappointed when they get a big title match on a PLE that doesn't live up to in-ring expectations. But WWE has long operated under a has long made an effort to try to tell the fans that it's not all about the wrestling. There is a significant portion of what we do that is predicated on storytelling. And they've had great success in a lot of instances doing that. I think you look at a lot of the stuff that the Bloodline does, for example, that is not heavily involved with putting on, 5-star classics, but instead is interested in telling a really compelling story. And then you have stuff in the women's division right now, like Liv Morgan and Nia Jax, where you're seeing sort of an amalgamation of the two. It didn't feel to me like Liv Morgan and Nia Jax had the meat of the story necessary to have a fully story-driven match. And they ended up having to do that because of the situation at hand. The majority of the match was built around the idea that Tiffany Stratton was inevitably going to get involved with a potential cash-in. And so the crowd was kind of just sitting on their hands, waiting for that moment to come. And until it did, there wasn't much investment there. And then on the flip side, you had Dominic Mysterio and Raquel Rodriguez just waiting to get involved. And again, when the fans did not see them coming out to the ring with Liv Morgan, they knew that nothing of consequence was going to happen until they got involved. So you had a match that was sort of doomed from the start, because even if they were trying to tell a compelling story with the in-ring work, the crowd wasn't ever going to really get behind it because they were waiting for very specific things. I thought the meat of the match, what they were trying to do, was okay for what it was. But to me, they just got too cute there in the final few minutes, and it got too overbooked for my liking. Greg, what did you think about this match? And to the larger point, do you think it's fine for matches like this to basically forego trying to have competitive, well wrestled matches and instead focus entirely on the stories at hand?
I think it depends on how good the story is. If it's a really good story, I'm able to overlook a so-so match. But if it was this, which is like a car crash of three different stories colliding in one match, it gets very messy. And I think that's to your point, Brandon, about the overbooking of it. Because on one hand, you've got the Crown Jewel Championship, the champion for SmackDown, the champion from Raw. Who is the best? Ultimately, that's what we were trying to find out. And that's what this match was built upon. So to that end, it was built about the match itself. So when the match itself doesn't deliver and that's the story, that's problematic. And then, as you said, you've got the story of Tiffany Stratton trying to cash in on whomever, whether it ended up being Nia Jax or Liv Morgan. So you had that story and her relationship with Nia Jax. And then you had the story of the relationship between Liv Morgan and Dominic Mysterio and Raquel, who were interfering on her behalf. So you had all three of these stories like trying to fight for airtime, and it just didn't work. So to your point, Azan, I don't mind if the stories are really good and the match is just so-so, but this was a so-so match, although it did, I believe, I have to check with Guinness, set the world record for most Samoan drops in one match. I think that is the record set here. But so
You heard it here first, folks.
yes, the problem was the stories that were all kind of colliding here didn't mesh very well in the story they were telling, the overarching story.
Yeah, definitely. Azan, Greg and I are going to continue moving through the rest of the card here, but anything you wanted to add to what Greg just said before we let you go?
Do you think PLE should have interference at all? I know WWE been doing this for the past, like the whole year. This bottom line, you think it's a yes or no? That's my final point. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of
Thanks,
course.
Azan.
We'll take that and run with it and look at the rest of the card. Azan, thanks so much for joining us.
All right.
And just a reminder too, if you are a VIP member, you can participate the way that Azan just did. You can also be part of the show by typing your questions into the chat, and Greg and I will talk about them here. Greg, to Azan's final point there, interference on PLEs, yay or nay?
I feel like this is a trap. Like if I say yes, there's going to be headlines. Greg Parks condones interference in PLEs. Look, like anything like that, I think it's best in small doses. I think WWE and AEW, for that matter, they can go a little crazy with interference, and I think it's best used sporadically. I think they tend to use it as a storytelling crutch to forward a story when there are better, more nuanced options out there. So I would pull back on it. But I think it is kind of a necessary evil in some ways, because there are some stories where that is simply the best option to take the next step and go from A to B.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that we have seen eras of WWE pay-per-views in the past before they were PLEs where the number of matches containing interference has been pretty egregious. And we've seen that in recent pay-per-views with AEW, where they have gone, just crazy overboard on the number of matches on a given card that will have interference. I think that there's always a place for it if it makes sense. It seemed like it was obviously going to happen in this particular match. And in fact, like I had mentioned previously, the crowd was just sort of waiting for it, anticipating it, because Tiffany Stratton has been getting involved in all of these Nia Jax matches. The Judgment Day is apt to get involved in all of Liv Morgan's matches. So you were just kind of waiting for it. And especially given the heel versus heel dynamic of this match, which, we can get into, them painting themselves into a corner with
that was another problem
Crown
with
Jewel
that
titles.
match.
Yeah. These Crown Jewel titles, forcing them into situations that they wouldn't otherwise book creates another issue, and then increases the likelihood that you're going to make sloppy booking decisions like interference. So it's really a case-by-case thing. But yeah, by and large, I would prefer that it be used sparingly and be used when it really makes sense and it adds to the story that you're telling and adds to the result of the matchup.
Yeah.
So we'll continue here to go through the card here, match by match. Second match of the night was a fatal 4-way women's tag team championship match. We had the champions Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill defending against Io Sky and Kairi Sane of Damage Control, Lash Legend and Jakara Jackson of NXT fame, and Chelsea Green and Piper Niven. So Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill retaining the women's tag team championships in just about 12 minutes here. Greg, take it away.
This was a lot of fun. I mean, it wasn't the best match on the show by any stretch, but they tried some things that were different, and some of them worked. So I give them credit for that. Lash Legend and Jakara Jackson are an interesting choice to be brought up, seemingly brought up. There's been no official word on whether or not they're really on the main roster or just kind of visiting, but they're certainly interesting when you look at the NXT women's roster and who they could have brought up in this position to bring up Lash Legend and Jakara Jackson. Interesting choice. I think we're already seeing them get better in the ring just by virtue of working with the main roster talents that they've worked with. And I mean, put them in there with Kairi Sane and folks like that, and they're going to get better very quickly on the main roster. You're going to have some bumps in the road, and we're in a time where the live audience is as forgiving to those bumps in the road as perhaps they've ever been. So it's not a huge deal if Lash Legend and Jakara Jackson come up and screw some things up in the process of getting better. It's not like a previous generation where you get cat calls and you effed up chants and things like that. But yeah, I thought this is a fun match. I really enjoyed it for what it was.
Yeah, I had a couple of things. For starters, I thought that the crowd at the start hurt this because there was just no interest in the first couple minutes of the match, and you could tell that like Bianca and Jade were really the only acts that the crowd had any sort of investment in at all, and that's a twofold problem. One, I think it's been apparent on these shows that on the Saudi shows in particular that there isn't a ton of interest in the women's division, and we all know the situation with women and the way women are presented in Saudi Arabia. It's been discussed ad nauseum. It's not a moral discussion we have to have on this show because many of us have had it on these shows many times. That these shows have been, since these shows have been happening for so many years. I continue to dislike, the way that they have to dress differently, the way that they have to present differently. But that is what it is. It's a fact of life when you're watching and reviewing these shows. So I am discouraged when, in addition to all of those, contributing factors, you have a crowd that's not particularly invested in the action or in the acts being presented. To their credit and to the wrestlers in this match's credit, the work that they were putting out there sort of necessitated that the crowd get more involved as the match progressed. And I thought that all 8 women in this match worked really hard. There were some really cool exchanges, some really cool moves that got pulled off very well. There were also a number of big spots that they tried and didn't quite execute, to perfection, and they were very notable. You could see them sort of falling apart, or the wrestlers having to think as they executed something. So there was a little bit of I think excitement to go out and really prove something, and in that there were some attempts at some offense that maybe the wrestlers involved weren't quite up to the skill level to execute. But for the most part, I thought that, like I said, the women worked really hard, and the moves that they did pull off, the big spots they did pull off, looked really good. So ultimately, like, this was fine for me because I think that the right team won. You want to continue to see Jade and Bianca build, and the other women are able to continue trying to improve their status within this division. Which kind of, before we wrap up the discussion on this match, Greg, 2 things. One, what do you make of the women's tag division as a whole? And then second, because I saw a lot of discussion about this today on social media and yesterday during the show, what do you make specifically of Jade Cargill and her improvements or lack thereof in her time on the main roster?
I think if WWE were doing more house shows, she'd get better at a faster rate. I think that's kind of what we're used to seeing, but it's a different generation. They're not doing house shows as much. That's less opportunity for someone like Jade Cargill to improve. I also think that we're used to seeing men and women come up to the main roster pretty close to being finished products. I mean, you think about all the wrestlers that we've seen in NXT that probably didn't need to go to NXT or were in NXT much longer than any one of us fans thought they needed to be. So it's a different, and I know she's worked out at the Performance Center and she's trained there. I don't know if she's still doing that today, but I know she had been down there for a while when she first started with WWE, just to continue to improve there. So it is just a different generation. And I keep coming back to that. I know I've said that a couple times today in terms of what expectations should be and how WWE operates from that standpoint in terms of wrestlers improving. And for Jade Cargill, it's a unique situation because normally someone with her limited experience would go to NXT, but I think she is valuable on the main roster for a lot of reasons. So I don't feel like her in-ring is so bad that it overshadows the good that her presence has on the main roster and her character and what her team with Bianca Belair has meant. So I don't have a problem with it. Like I said, I hope she does get better. The mechanisms aren't really in place like that house show schedule that it used to be, and for good reason. I mean, I don't want I don't
Yeah.
want them to go back to running 8 shows a week or whatever like it was in the early 90s or anything like that. But that was an opportunity. A consistent house show schedule would allow people to get better, working with better wrestlers, working in front of live audiences, just picking up tricks of the trade and how to react in the ring to what the audience is giving you. And I think that's an important skill too, as much as the actual in-ring work is a skill. So that'll come. I'm confident she's a good enough athlete and seems to care enough about this where I think she's going to get better and going to continue to get better.
Yeah, and as far as the tag team situation right now, what's your read on the women's tag team division? Do you think that they've done a decent job building these other teams up? Do you see anyone in particular that feels like a real credible threat for Jade and Bianca right now?
Well, we had 4 teams in this match, all with pretty distinct personalities, although I don't think we've really gotten to know Jakara and Lash very much
Mhm.
from a personality standpoint in the few weeks they've been on the main roster. But certainly we know Chelsea Green and Piper Niven. We know all the others. Um, Kyrie Sane and Io Sky, we know them. We know Bianca and Jade Cargill. There are others, the Sonya Deville group is kind of an up and coming group there. Interested to see where they go. I think, when that group was first put together, I figured it was to move right into something with Cargill and Belair, and they've kind of kept
Mhm.
them separate for now. And,
And
you've
they've
got others
lost a
that,
lot too.
yeah, which is surprised me. Indy Hartwell just being released, her and
Mhm.
Candice were a team there for a while. So I don't, maybe Candice gets another partner somewhere along the line. I'm not sure. But for the low expectations and the low bar that the women's tag division has set over the years, this is like the golden age of women's tag team wrestling in WWE. Unless you want to go back to, I don't know, the Glamour Girls and the Jumping Bomb Angels.
You said it. The bar is low. The bar is
Yeah.
certainly low. All right, so moving on. Match number 3. Seth Rollins facing Big Bronson Reed. This one started with a big brawl on the outside. Enough of a brawl that I, for a moment, wondered if they were not going to have the match. They were saving that, of course, for Randy Orton and Kevin Owens later on. Seth Rollins ends up winning the match in 12 minutes and about 21 seconds. It takes not one, not two, but 3 stomps. The first on the outside of the ring onto the steel steps, the second in the ring, and then one more coming off of the top for a super stomp. I thought that this was, in terms of a pure a match that, you know, for me, what I look for in a really good PLE match is typically going to be, was the wrestling good, and did they tell a good story, and does it, help the characters involved, and does it further something that they're trying to tell, a weekly story that they're trying to tell. And for my money, this match did that better than any on this particular show. I thought that Cody and Gunther was a much better match in the ring, but I thought that booking the match in general was counterproductive. So in this instance, we had Seth and Bronson Reed facing off for the first time. It's hitting this rivalry that kind of crescendoed when Seth Rollins' return cost Bronson Reed his match against Braun Strowman several weeks ago on Raw. I thought that Seth sold Reed's offense really, really well. I loved the post-match angle where, Reed comes up and he's got that nasty gash just above his eyebrow, and he's seething, staring down at Seth. And Seth is, celebratory because he won the match and he beat him clean. But he's like, how the hell is this guy standing and showing virtually no signs of wear? So I thought that was really good. Put Bronson Reed over as this big monster, and also set Seth on a good trajectory going forward, because he's a main event, heavily featured guy. You want to get him a win in his first big match back. So, Greg, let me know what you thought about the match, the story, and also maybe what you think is next for Bronson in particular.
This was about as good as you can look in defeat. As good as you could be booked in defeat. So that gives me confidence for Bronson Reed moving forward. I've been a Bronson Reed truther for a long time, so it's good to see him getting his due from WWE. And yes, he lost here to Seth Rollins. There's no shame in losing to someone the level of Seth Rollins. And certainly, as I said, he was booked to look as good in defeat as you can look. The 3 stomps taking him out, including one from the top, coming up and standing and wanting more after the match. I mean, that's huge too. It was kind of booked like a Brock Lesnar match for the first couple minutes. Like they were just spamming the finishes and hitting hard. And I thought, oh, maybe this will be like a 4-minute sprint or something like that. And then it settled down into a normal match after that, which was really good. I'm not convinced we're done with Rollins versus Reed. I wouldn't be surprised if we get something else with them. But Bronson Reed's arrow absolutely pointing up here, and so I'm really interested. He's one of the guys who I tune into Raw to see, and I'm excited to see him when I tune into Raw on Monday nights and seeing what he's doing, because he's got my attention, and I'm hoping for big things continuing into WrestleMania season for him.
I thought this was good that they got it on the event too, because this was a match that you could have seen them headline Raw with instead.
Yep.
And they've been doing that a lot with these secondary feuds, and I think it's important to get someone like Bronson Reed on a premium live event where he has been a guy who, so far, his big matches, his big blow-offs have come on Raw instead of on these major events. So I thought it was good to get the match on there, and yeah, I like you, I could see them doing, going back to the well on this, and also moving Bronson onto something else. But I'm a pretty big fan of Reed as well, and I hope that they've got something in mind for him as we head toward WrestleMania season. So next match on the card, match number 4. We don't need to spend a ton of time on it because we did talk about it a bit already with Azan. But Nia Jax versus Liv Morgan for the Women's Crown Jewel Championship. Liv Morgan goes over in this match. It only went just over 8 minutes. The majority of this thing was spent on the will she or won't she tease of Tiffany Stratton cashing in Money in the Bank. She attempted to do so multiple times. First time was thwarted by Nia Jax. Second time was thwarted by Raquel Rodriguez interfering on behalf of the Judgment Day. This was a whole lot of interference and not much meat on the bone in terms of the match goes. Again, Greg, we've kind of talked most of what we'll probably say about this one, but again, to reiterate, I thought that having this match in the first place was really counterproductive. They booked themselves into a corner, having a heel versus heel dynamic. Neither woman worked the match as a babyface, but the Saudi crowd de facto crowned Liv Morgan as the babyface in this match, getting behind her pretty strongly. What did you make of that? And if it is indicative of something larger in terms of crowd support for Liv Morgan, and anything else that you wanted to add about this match that we haven't covered so far?
Yeah, I wouldn't read too much into it. She's the underdog in this match just because of the size differential. So I think that was played a big part in the
Yeah.
fans choosing Liv Morgan over Nia Jax. I know there's some people who online who are have been really big proponents of Nia Jax in-ring work since her return. I just haven't seen it. It's kind of the same old Nia Jax to me. I just haven't been impressed with the work that she's done relative to her push. And the heel versus heel dynamic, as you said, made this really difficult. I've lost a lot of interest in Tiffany Stratton. I'll be honest in this whole storyline. I just don't. The her with the briefcase has not really impressed me. The story they're telling. I was on a post SmackDown show with Wade a couple weeks ago where I really was not a fan of Tiffany Stratton, who had been built up in NXT and the first couple episodes that she was on SmackDown as this, powerful, sassy woman. And now she's kind of cowering to Nia Jax and like, pouting when Nia Jax is mean to her. And it's like, that's just like so outside the character. And I don't know if it's
Mhm.
because, she started getting babyface cheers and WWE thought, okay, let's go with that. Let's start a story that eventually turns, goes to a babyface turn, which I could see this story playing out as Tiffany Stratton eventually becoming a babyface. But I just think so much damage has been done along the way. I'm not into the story. I'm not into this version of the Tiffany Stratton character that we've seen lately.
Yeah, I think that it's gotten a little overplayed. They're playing their hand a little bit too heavily with the amount that they're leaning into Tiffany teasing the cash in and the back and forth with she and Nia. I think the issue that they've kind of booked themselves into at this point is you have a women's champion who the crowd is not particularly invested in, and so they are spending all of her screen time and all of her match time just hoping that tonight will be the night that they get to see the cash in, that tonight will be the night that Tiffany comes out and turns on her.
And it's that
And
moment. It's that every crowd wants to see a moment. And that's why you
Mhm.
see heel beatdowns getting cheered and heels winning
Right.
championships getting cheered because WWE has conditioned fans to, it's all about the WrestleMania moment, right? So they've
Mhm.
conditioned fans to forget about baby faces and heels and just want to see that moment when you're there live.
Yeah, and it's become an issue because Naya is I'm sort of in the middle, probably like if you're on the low end of the Nia Jax has improved scale, I probably fall somewhere in the middle. Like I feel like she has has to me unquestionably been better than her first run, but not good enough to warrant the level of push that she's currently
Let me say this.
receiving.
I think she can be good, but there's a very limited number of opponents and styles that she's good in the
Yes.
ring against.
Yes. Yep. Yep. I think that's a good point. I just think that they've put themselves in a precarious position in that right now they have two heel world champions who are not able to carry the wrestling side of things up to the level that I think fans have grown to expect from the women's division. And so you are dealing with a situation where women's title matches are being overshadowed by Money in the Bank cash in possibilities, by interference from the Judgment Day on behalf of Liv Morgan, interference from Tiffany Stratton, even when she's not trying to cash in Money in the Bank. And you're left with this scenario where the quality of the title matches is largely dependent on which babyface is being fed to these heel champions in a given month. And I just don't think that it's a strong position to be in, especially when you're working from that position on both shows at the same time. It would be one thing if you had a Rhea Ripley, for example, representing the title on one brand and then Nia Jax on the other. But with Liv Morgan, who struggles in the same areas that Nia does, it creates an issue in terms of, the not just the believability, but the main event prospects of your women's division, which I think
Yeah.
they've done a really good job at cultivating the last few years. Anything else that you want to touch on with this match before we head on down the card?
Nope, I'm all set.
All right. So after this, we had what was supposed to be Kevin Owens versus Randy Orton. We know, of course, that match did not occur. Greg and I have touched on this a little bit already with Azan when he had joined us earlier on in the show. This just turned into a big brawl when Randy Orton was completing his very long entrance. That the Saudi crowd sang his theme song in full to him, which was cool. Kevin Owens attacked him on the turnbuckle with a steel chair to the back of the knee. Randy Orton then started selling the knee. It looked for a minute like the match might begin, but they brawled on the outside. They brawled into the crowd, and eventually Kevin Owens would deliver a flying elbow drop off of the lower bowl of the arena through a couple of tables and Randy Orton. Announcers sold this like Kevin Owens was a complete psychopath, like they couldn't comprehend the level of violence they were seeing, which to me felt a little bit overblown. We've seen, more heinous attacks on WWE TV, even just in recent memory. This didn't feel particularly egregious to me, but it was a satisfying brawl. Anything you wanted to add, Greg, about our conversation or from earlier about this?
I just think it's interesting, Kevin Owens going to the extremes that he did, even though, yes, we've seen worse, but
Mhm.
keeping in mind that Randy Orton, longtime friend of Kevin Owens, confidant of Kevin
Mhm.
Owens, and it does seem like something has snapped in the mind of the character of Kevin Owens.
Mhm.
And so interested to see where that goes because, he had some plausible deniability here and maybe some legitimate reasons why he's done what he's done up to this point. And that kind of got thrown out the window here. This was another level beyond that. So I am interested. Kevin Owens is very good on the mic at
Mhm.
making sense of what's going on and making his character seem like he's in the right even when he's a heel, which of course is the best type of heel. When you can do that and you can
Mhm.
express that and you've got that in your back pocket. So I am interested to see. I think they'll be off TV for a while. So whenever he does return to TV, what his explanation is here.
Yeah, I expand on that too a little bit. I want to get your thoughts on where each of these two characters go from here. We assume that they're probably going to face off again at some point. But do you expect there to be an extended layoff for either of these guys? Does Kevin Owens transition into a title program with Cody Rhodes? What do you expect in terms of timeline here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I could see it, Survivor Series, 3.5 weeks. Could they try Kevin Owens versus Randy Orton there with some sort of stipulation? Um, do they transition, as you mentioned, to let's say Kevin Owens versus Cody Rhodes and put off Owens versus Orton for somewhere further down the line? Or Rhodes does need challengers, right? I mean, and Kevin Owens makes as much sense as anyone else and has that personal beef with Cody Rhodes. And I think Cody Rhodes would go out there and say, I want to fight Kevin Owens for what he's done. Rhodes was in the building when this happened here yesterday and watched Randy Orton, someone that Cody Rhodes respects, get beaten down in a vicious way by Kevin Owens. So he may go to Nick Aldis and say, look, you've suspended Kevin Owens for a week or two or whatever it is, but when he comes back, I want first dibs. And so I really don't know. It's hard to say because WWE has a checkered track record when it comes to how long people are out for and things like that. So again,
Mhm.
I could see Owens versus Rhodes at Survivor Series for the title. I could see Owens versus Orton at Survivor Series. I could see them holding off on Owens versus Orton until a month, 2 months down the line, making it into a really big match. And this could also be, if you're talking Owens Orton, this could just be the first. This could be a multiple match type of feud that
Yep.
really gets stretched on down the line. So that's another thing to consider as well.
Yeah, I think where this gets so interesting is there was a lot of talk early on when we were kind of going through plotting who could or couldn't be involved in war games this year. And Cody Rhodes' name was thrown out a number of times as far as being a potential partner for the original bloodline. And
Mhm.
now that it appears as though Jey Uso and Sami Zayn are likely, to be in that match firmly, and it doesn't look like the new bloodline is going to be adding a fifth member. At least we haven't seen any teases of that yet. It seems less likely that Cody Rhodes will be needed for that War Games match, which then frees him up for a potential title defense. So then
Mhm.
you're kind of looking at the potential options like you raise. Is it Randy Orton in another face versus face match where there's just it's a respectful competition the way that the first match between Cody and Kevin Owens was, or is
Mhm.
it KO again right now? We go full on. So I think we'll probably have a better idea after this week's SmackDown what direction they're going to go, because it does seem like they're going to have a pretty quick turnaround here with Survivor Series happening the last day of the month. So I
Mhm.
suspect they'll probably have a fairly quick turnaround on determining exactly what is next for those two guys. Next match on the rundown here, we've talked about this a little bit, more so the prospects of LA Knight going forward, but not so much the match itself yet. So, fifth match of the night, LA Knight defended his United States Championship in a triple threat match against Carmelo Hayes and Andrade. Carmelo and Andrade coming off of their 7-match series, the seventh of which was broken up by LA Knight. That's how we got to this match. LA Knight retains the championship in just over 9 minutes with a double BFT. It wasn't quite, he wasn't quite hitting the move on Andrade, but the way that Andrade was hooked by Carmelo made it look like they both got hit with the BFT. I thought this was too short to cross into that really good territory. There wasn't enough meat to the match length for it to be, a really epic triple threat. But I thought for the time that they were given, these three worked really, really well together. It was a continuation of what we've seen from Andrade and Carmelo on SmackDown, and throwing LA Knight into the mix, even though he is not as great of a wrestler as the other two. He was a fresh wrinkle, and I thought that he played his part really well. The innovative spots here throughout were great, and I thought the finish was great. Greg, how did you feel about this one?
Yeah, I thought it was good. I don't think I'm as high on it as you are, but I go back to the Andrade Carmelo Hayes part of it and their best of series that we've seen on SmackDown. And my concern is that by the end of their feud, they're just going to be in the same spot they were, right? Because
Yep.
you've dedicated all this TV time, all these matches to Andrade and Carmelo Hayes, who's going to get the better of the other. And it does feel like at some point when it's finally done, whether it's here, whether it, wherever it is, that it should be a stepping stone for one of these guys. I think they're both, you could make the argument for either one, really taking that next step up the card and, make Andrade a potential challenger to Cody Rhodes or Carmelo Hayes or something like that. I mean, just it's got to mean something. You can't spend all this TV time and ask fans to invest in 7 matches or however many it is that we've seen between these two guys, and then just when it's over, say, okay, now they're just going to feud with someone else, and they're going to be in the same mid card position. So that's kind of my fear coming out of that. But as for the match itself, yeah, it was good. LA Knight gets the victory here. Maybe the end game here is that one of them becomes United States champion, that they beat LA Knight somewhere along the way. And I think that would be a satisfying conclusion for the winner of the Andrade Carmelo Hayes battle that we've been seeing. It's not a world championship opportunity, but it is something that you can say, hey, this guy coming out of this feud, coming out of this 7-match best of 7 series, he got something for it. He's better coming out of it than he was going in terms of being positioned on the card.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I noted this too in my report for pwtorch.com yesterday during the live coverage of the show that the Andrade and Carmelo Hayes situation is too reminiscent to me to the days of Vince McMahon where we would see these rematches week in and week out on Raw and on SmackDown, and they would all end with 50-50 booking. And that's where we're at with these two. They've had 7 matches. The 7th ended in a no contest because of LA Knight. So they are tied 3-3 right now.
Mhm.
And like you said, Greg, to date, no one has risen above the ashes yet. No one has separated themselves from the pack. Both Andrade and Carmelo Hayes are still exactly where we started this thing. And the wrestling has been very good, but
Yeah.
it's the criticism that I have often levied against AEW, and you have as well, where you're getting this great wrestling, but no one's getting over from it because
Mhm.
either the story isn't compelling, they're not telling enough of a story, or because there's just no upward mobility after the feud or the match ends. And
Mhm.
so far, that's what we've seen with both Andrade and Carmelo Hayes. And you would think with the SmackDown roster being as thin as it is right now, there would be some real impetus for Paul Levesque and for others in creative to try to really push one of these guys above the fold and get them to a point where they feel like stars. And so far, it just hasn't happened.
Yeah.
All right. So, with that being said, we are on, Greg, to the main event. Gunther, World Heavyweight Champion, facing Cody Rhodes, WWE Champion, for the Men's Crown Jewel Championship. Now, during the course of this match, or it might have been during the women's match, I don't recall exactly, but we got the confirmation from Michael Cole and Corey Graves that the very expensive, very diamond studded Crown Jewel Championships would not, in fact, be making their way back to the United States with their respective winners, but would instead be placed on display at the WWE Experience in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. In fact, if any of you tuned in for even just a couple of minutes of the post PLE post show that WWE put on, you would see that they actually put both Liv Morgan and Cody Rhodes in a golf cart and drove them to the WWE Experience so that they could drop off the Crown Jewel Championships. So these two wrestlers got to hold these very expensive, very gaudy belts for only a few minutes before sending them over to WWE's Experience location in Riyadh. With
Well,
that being
hopefully,
said, yeah,
hopefully the Saudi Arabian government paid for the belts and not WWE.
hopefully, yeah, with the number of jewels in those things, yeah. So with that being said, Cody Rhodes wins this one in just over 23 minutes. This was a slow plotting, typical Gunther match in the opening minutes. Crowd was back and forth between just really into the moment and really into the match. There were times where they were doing the wave, seemingly not paying attention to what was happening in the ring when there was some, a lot of transition holds and jockeying for position between the two wrestlers. And then there was a lot of singing to Cody Rhodes and a lot of, coming up for the big spots when Cody got his comebacks. But this was a lot of Gunther dominating in typical Gunther fashion. They did their absolute best to protect Gunther in a loss here. Finish came when Cody Rhodes went for a super Cody cutter off of the top turnbuckle. He leapt backwards into the waiting arms of Gunther, who put him in a sleeper hold for the third or fourth time in the matchup. And in trying to obtain as much momentum as he could and wrap the legs, he actually allowed Cody Rhodes to flip up onto his shoulders and catch Gunther in a pinfall attempt a la the classic Bret Hart spot. And they were sure to push that this was the Bret Hart spot in the aftermath.
Bret
Greg,
Hart, Roddy Piper, I believe, was the
yeah,
specific match they cited.
yeah. Greg, what did you think of this one?
You mentioned the crowd, and I think I want to give credit to the crowd here in Saudi Arabia, because I remember when WWE was first going there, and the crowd seemed disinterested, didn't know these
Mhm.
wrestlers and things like that. So I don't know if WWE has become more of a presence on TV in Saudi Arabia or what it is, but the fans
A
here
different
were,
looking crowd too.
yeah,
They, they
that could
look
be it
they
as
look like
well.
actual fans instead of like government officials and their
That
families.
that helps. That
Yeah.
helps. So, the crowd was up for a lot of this show, and I think it enhanced the show to a certain extent. Cody Rhodes, Gunther, solid wrestling match. I mean, this is the kind of, I thought maybe, Lord knows there's enough interference on this show, but you're thinking when you've got a champion of Raw and a champion of SmackDown, they're going to try to do their best to not make the loser seem like a loser. Like they will hedge as much as they can, interference, distraction, whatever the case may be, because you don't want one champion to seem weaker than the other. You don't want people to see one brand as weaker than the other. But
Mhm.
they did that finish that sort of protected Gunther, but it was a clean finish. There was no
Yep.
interference, no distractions, anything like that. You could even say Cody outsmarted Gunther. So that was a nice breath of fresh air, I guess, is a way to phrase it. But yeah, it was just solid wrestling match, and different than the other wrestling that we had seen throughout the show. We didn't see a real wrestlers wrestling match the way that this
Yeah.
was. So that was nice as well to have that tacked on at the end there.
Yeah, I thought that this was a really good match. Like I sort of referenced earlier, I thought it was the best pure wrestling match of the night. But I take
Mm.
it down a few pegs for simply happening because I just think that this concept is so counterproductive to everything that WWE has been trying to do under Paul Levesque's creative. And you could tell in the lead up that Triple H did not feel committed to this. It felt like his hand was forced. It felt like the Saudi shows, when they began, were a very specific type of event. They were non canonical, glorified house shows. You never saw consequential title changes. You rarely saw what you would expect for angles that would play out week to week on television. It felt like it existed in its own universe, for better or for worse. And as time has gone on, they have folded these events into the main canon of WWE weekly storytelling. And I think they've been better for it overall. Whether you agree or disagree with the notion of coming to Saudi Arabia for these events at all, the simple fact is the contract is there. They're going to honor it. If they're going to honor it, I'd prefer that they just treat these shows like actual shows that you're supposed to watch and not just a vanity project. And so I commend them for that. The problem here is that this felt like a backslide into the former territory, but not all the way, because the Saudi events of yesteryear, or for example, the Survivor Series concept of yesteryear, would see all champion versus champion matches up and down the card. The previous iterations of the Saudi events would see matches that were of no consequence to weekly storytelling. Now you had a mixture, matches that were consequential to weekly storytelling, and then these two big matches to decide a champion that is never going to be mentioned again until next November when they're building this show, and titles that aren't going to be worn by the champion. So to have these matches and to be booked into a corner where one of your guys and one of your girls who you're pushing as a major act on Raw and on SmackDown has to lose, to me, is not worth the squeeze that you're getting out of it. I would have found a different concept, whatever that may be, to make the Saudis feel like they're getting something special. But this isn't special, and it does damage to your television product the rest of the year, especially when you're heading into WrestleMania season. And I get that they can tell stories that will cover this up. And no, Gunther losing to Cody Rhodes isn't the end of the world. But would it be better if he didn't in a meaningless match on a Saudi show? Absolutely. I mean, Gunther is not benefited in any way by losing to Cody Rhodes on the road to facing whomever is going to challenge him at WrestleMania. John Cena, for example, whoever the case may be. I just don't think that the juice is worth the squeeze on these matches. Greg, do you feel similarly? Do you what I don't even want to lead the question. What do you feel?
I think in the pantheon of Saudi Arabian show stipulations and ways that WWE has tried to drum up interest for these shows, whether it's to get fans to watch the shows or to appease the Saudi overlords who are giving WWE boatloads of money for this, and perhaps even requesting special, events in some way. This is pretty innocent, I think. You look back at some of the other stuff that WWE has done, the greatest Royal Rumble. I mean,
Yeah.
really just taking down the concept of the Royal Rumble and bastardizing it for the Saudis. I think that was a pretty low point, I think, for these shows. So to have a show where you have this concept that is not a great concept, but it could be a lot worse. So I guess I don't mind it as much, and I'd rather they do it as a one-off and maybe not mentioned again, than to have it continue and carry forth. Because there are other things on this show that will, there were other matches on this show that will be taken from this and continuing on the storytelling process throughout SmackDown and Raw over the next few days and weeks. And Gunther losing to Cody Rhodes, the biggest star in WWE right now. You could make the argument, as you did, Brandon, that he shouldn't be losing in any way to anyone, that it may damage his credibility as champion. I'm not going to argue too vociferously against that. I'm just thinking that if we are in a situation where you've got to come up with a concept for these Saudi shows, and we don't know that for sure to be the case, but
Sure.
based on past history and the requests of the Crown Prince, it's quite possible that with all the money that Saudi is paying, they want shows that feel special above and beyond just a B-level pay-per-view. They don't want Bad Blood at Saudi Arabia. They want something bigger than that. So,
and just the body language of Paul Levesque too. He just didn't seem invested in this.
This is something to kind of meet in the middle here. It gives the Saudi Arabian government what they want, but it doesn't interfere with WWE's week-to-week storytelling, and it doesn't, mess with that in any significant way, I don't think.
Sure. Just one more thing here. We had a note in the chat earlier on tonight from Mashup Dad. He just said, signing in and out. The first Saudi show made me cancel my WWE subscription. Now a lot of my respect for Cody has disappeared with his happy face for the blood money belt. And yeah, we haven't really talked a lot about the concept of these shows, save for passing mentions, Greg. But it is something that permeates these Saudi shows. There is a feeling that you get when you are watching them, and a lot of people just straight up choose not to, for a variety of reasons. And I think that is perfectly fair and acceptable. To be honest, if I weren't covering these shows for pwtorch, I probably wouldn't bother watching them. I may choose to skip them. I just didn't want to finish this show without highlighting that, because we did specifically have a comment about it. Anything you want to add in that respect, Greg?
No, I think that's fair. And if you choose not to watch these shows, because you just don't believe WWE should be taking money from the Saudi Arabian government and putting shows on there, I respect that. And I think it is worth bringing up to say, this is all happening in the background of what we're talking about, right? It's the WWE not just taking money from Saudi Arabia, but acting as an agent of, trying to whitewash what Saudi Arabia is doing and trying to, drum up tourism for the country. And there have been times WWE initially was like, this propaganda vehicle for Saudi Arabia, and then they kind of got away from that and they weren't mentioning it as much, and now they're back to doing more with that. So, um, it's certainly doesn't make me feel great to watch these shows and um, to report on them, but I think it's part of what we do. We can't just pretend they don't happen. I think when they do happen, we talk about them, and then we talk about this part of it.
Yeah, for sure. Don Hickshaw in the chat said Cody needed this. It was for Cody's first legitimate win against a legitimate adversary. I think that is a really good point as far as the minutia of this match goes. If you get past the the counterproductive booking of pitting your champions against each other, that is a really important point, and sort of highlights one reason to go forward with something like this is Cody has had a weaker slate of challengers in his run thus far, and a lot of that is simply because of the depth on SmackDown. They just haven't had the guys there to really give him major challengers so far. So a win over Gunther is certainly a big deal.
Yeah, I don't think he's in danger of being seen as less than for it from the fans. I don't think it's really hurt his popularity or anything like that. But it will be good, when he's building up to WrestleMania to look back and say, hey, he beat a guy the level of Gunther, and that's worth something.
Yeah, for sure. So before we wrap up, Greg, I just want to just quick to try to get overall feelings on the event. I know I already said this on Twitter after the show happened and in my report for pwtorch. This was for me the first WWE PLE of the year that I gave a thumbs down to. It was, albeit a very mild thumbs down, very close to thumbs in the middle. I figured I would make the commitment and go in the direction rather than hedging, and I did that because I didn't think that the undercard matches quite made up for my general dislike and displeasure with the concept of the Crown Jewel Championships. I know I'm a little lower on the concept than you are, though. You have offered plenty of legitimate criticism of it as well. Where do you sit overall on this show, Greg?
I was thumbs in the middle, and I think a big part of that is our difference on the concept. If you are really strongly against that, or if you were really strongly against the concept coming into the show, I don't think how things played out changed your mind at all, as it clearly did not for you. So I could see how you would end up in the thumbs down camp for that. But it was thumbs in the middle for me. I think we've seen a lot stronger WWE pay-per-views and PLEs this year. They've set the bar very high, quite frankly, with the shows, and so has AEW. So they're at one point, maybe 5-10 years ago, this would have been seen as a thumbs up show. But part of what you're doing when you're looking at these shows is you're grading them against what you've seen, and context is important. And what kind of shows has WWE put on in the recent past? And when the bar is so high, I think it makes a show like this that was not nearly as high stand out even more.
For sure. Before we go, Greg, just going to throw out there, you, of course, have, if you have not done so already, have the opportunity to become a pwtorch VIP member. You can do that at pwtorch.com/go-VIP. Podcasts are available on Spotify, Apple, Android, and to stream right from the site. Also gives you a bunch of perks, including the ability to join these shows with us live. You can do so as a traditional caller if you don't want to be shown on camera, or you can hop right in the live stream with us the way that Azan did earlier on in the evening. We certainly thank all of our VIP members for joining us and for participating as well in the chat. You also get a whole bunch of great content, great specialty shows like The Fix with Todd Martin, everything with Rich Fan, the post-event roundtable podcast that I will occasionally join in on. And then, of course, my co-host tonight's show, Greg Parks Out Loud. So, Greg, before we go, I just want to make sure you get an opportunity to plug what you do for the Torch.
Yeah, I write a full page column each and every week in the Torch newsletter. And then Greg Parks Out Loud is my VIP audio show where I will read the column and go a little bit more in depth in certain ways that won't fit into a full page. And in fact, I just this afternoon wrote my column for this coming week's Torch newsletter. And as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to record Greg Parks Out Loud. So you should be able to find that within the next few days if you're a VIP member of pwtorch.com. And I also write a shorter Parks's take each and every week on pwtorch.com. At the time that it gets posted varies. Sometimes it's early in the week, sometimes it's late in the week. It really depends on when inspiration strikes me to write it, but I've committed to one Parks's take a week, and I've been pretty good with that over the last few months. So you can bet on seeing that this coming week as well. And as I said at the top, I drop in on these shows every once in a while. If Wade needs an emergency replacement or a co-host for a show, I'm happy to do that now that I have a little more time, now that I'm not hosting Wrestling Night in America full time each and every week.
Nor am I, but I am hosting. I am hosting after WWE PLEs and AEW pay-per-views. For those,
well,
that
that's like
us,
full time anyway at this point, Brandon. I mean,
I mean, we did talk about that. Yeah, it's certainly become a larger job than one would have anticipated. For those that joined us a little late, you may have noticed the switcheroo. Usually I'm over there, Greg is over here. But when Greg gave up the host seat after Bash in Berlin earlier, I stepped in to take over host duties for not every week, but for post PLE and post pay-per-view Wrestling Night in America episodes. So, Greg, it was great to have you back on the show so soon. I didn't expect it, but I certainly welcomed it.
Oh, you did a fantastic job hosting, Brandon. It was great to talk to you again and talking wrestling. It really takes me back. So, no, I'm happy to do this. Happy to fill in every once in a while.
Takes you back to August.
It takes me back. I mean, hit the Wayback Machine for this one, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes. So it was great talking to you and catching up on wrestling again.
For sure. Thanks so much, Greg. And you can follow my PW Torch work each and every pay-per-view and PLE for WWE and AEW. I cover alt perspective reports for PW Torch, so you can read my report alongside Wade Keller's for the WWE shows and the AEW shows. You can also catch me as an occasional co-host for Wade Keller Pro Wrestling post shows, Raw, SmackDown, Dynamite, and then on these for the time being going forward. I will see you next on the post show for. What is the next show that we have? It'll be Full Gear at the end of November. So that'll be the next episode of Wrestling Night in America, hosted by me. In the meantime, thank you so much to Azan for joining us on the VIP side of things, and everyone that joined us in the chat. And hope those that are listening on demand enjoy as well. Thank you so much. Go VIP. And until next time, this has been Wrestling Night in America.